I would like to sincerely extend my gratitude for the opportunity to address the Oireachtas Joint Committee on Health and Children in relation to a subject that I am profoundly and unreservedly passionate about: the mental and emotional well-being of the youth of this country, and how we can work together to build a more supportive and sustainable future for our children and teenagers. My passion is built upon personal experience, where as a teenager I simply did not have the capacity to cope with an utterly dominant anxiety disorder that seemed hell-bent on robbing me of my character and personality at every available opportunity. Crippling insomnia, harrowing panic attacks and incomprehensible self-harm dictated my life, all disguised behind a mask of normality that polarised the general lazy stereotype or label we associate with those with a mental health illness. The quiet guy in the corner, the guy with no friends, the guy who keeps himself to himself. I was none of these things. Yet I continuously failed to comprehend why I couldn't breathe some nights, or why my chest constantly felt as if there was a cavity block being placed upon it, while that perpetual ruthless nausea became all too common part of my life. Some days I would sit in my classroom on the verge of fainting as I hyperventilated and fought for air while my teachers continued to teach the class, oblivious to the fact that one of their students was in the midst of a living nightmare. I spent so many of my school days praying that some of our teachers may talk about this, or just say something so I didn't feel so isolated and terrified. They never did. My greatest support and emotional scaffolding was the fact that I came from a loving, stable family, and I used to think that if I didn't have this, what could have happened? I really didn't want to contemplate that. Over many years, my anxiety disorder manipulated and sabotaged many careers and relationships like it tends to do. But I count myself lucky that I've always had that inner resilience to defy its grasps, and after many years of hostility and conflict with my mind, I've learned to control, respect and even strengthen its capacity to cope, done through dedication, sacrifice and a complete desire to regain control over an illness that could have been limited or perhaps prevented if I received effective and required education and knowledge around what it actually was. It was let grow into a monster that fed in silence, fear and lack of understanding. So why am I addressing this committee today? The reality is our youth, the future of this country, need urgent help. They are exposed to too much. So much is expected from them, and both the external and internal pressures they are being asked to cope with are simply not viable, and the result is the great epidemic of their generation. Agonising suicide rates, disturbingly high anxiety and depression rates, self-harm, eating disorders, OCD, the list goes on. We simply cannot ignore this anymore. We have to be honest and ask ourselves, truly, are we doing enough here? It's a transitional period in this country regarding the dialogue around mental health and emotional well-being. The draconian stigma that has ravished families throughout Ireland for generations is slowly eroding. The mass media are engaging with the conversation, while handfuls of schools and organisations are carrying the message to a wider audience and no doubt saving countless lives while doing so. We have gradually commenced normalising the conversation surrounding our mental health, and this must be promoted, nurtured and celebrated at every level. However, I truly wish I could stand up here and suggest that it's an entirely positive situation. I am not one for blurting out statistics, for I feel they often lack substance, and they don't tend to be evident in the stories I hear every single day on my website, alustforlife.com, in the countless schools and workplaces that I have addressed, and from the literally thousands of people that have emailed me over the past few months regarding their mental health challenges. In order for us to progress in this regard, everybody in this room has to be painfully honest with each other and accept that our mental health services and systems are not even close to being adequate or resourced for the demand and requirement that are placed upon them. The people within the mental health services do Trojan work with the resources available to them, but their hands are unfortunately tied in way too many situations. This is not a blame game or a headhunt, but in order for us to build an effective long-term strategy, we have to park the egos, the politics and economics and put people first here. We have some incredibly gifted people in this country when it comes to education, mental health and psychology. So it's a matter of joining the dots, empowering and building something together that can give our youth the support they require to survive in this often chaotic world. I've witnessed firsthand some of the powerful work schools, students and charity and awareness organisations are doing up and down this country with little or no resource. And this is so uplifting to observe, but the reality is it's not systematic and certainly not across the board. As politicians, you are paid by the taxpayer to cater for the needs of the people, and in this regard, a lot of work is required. I have heard horror stories regarding the child and adolescent mental health services CAMHS that are almost too distressing to share on this platform. Families totally helpless, while some families have to drive hundreds of miles and wait months to see a healthcare professional. If it were any of your children, I hope you can see how utterly unacceptable that is. Although I am not a healthcare professional, I don't think you need to be to see some of the gaping holes in logic when it comes to our strategy around mental health. I feel whatever solution is reached, it will be done together as we all aim to achieve the same thing here. What would I like to see being explored? I feel we have to kind of look at this in two ways. We have to address primary preventative measures that can allow people to deal with their mental health issues at an infancy stage, build mental fitness and resilience, and also educate teachers and students in recognise how the mind, although it can be weakened, can also be strengthened. How can this be done? Well, firstly, rather than over-rely on medical models, create easy access to talk therapies and counselling service at a community level. The idea of a teenager having to be driven halfway across the country after waiting 2 months for a referral is totally unacceptable. A two-tier system when it comes to mental health simply doesn't work. Access to immediate and without charge should be immediate and without charge for every child and teenager in this country. Help in many cases cannot wait, and this should not be left to voluntary organisations and charities, which up to now have been the biggest support structure for many families. Reach out to those communities absolutely torn apart from suicide and support them in rebuilding their community by improving both individual and collective resilience by effective and focused mental health education programmes. Some of these points have also been echoed by recommendations made by the Children's Mental Health Coalition report chaired by Mental Health Reform on how youth services can be improved across Ireland. 2. Let's explore the best solutions for implementing mental health and wellbeing into our education curriculum. Positive psychology programmes, mindfulness programmes, stress management programmes have countless evidence and researches illustrating their benefit to the well-being of teachers and students, but also how they can facilitate and actually improve learning, which makes you beg the question, why aren't we doing it? This is no doubt complex, but as a nation we have never shied away from progressive and brave social enterprises. Once the will and vision exist, this can be done. It requires leadership and the empowerment of our educators and our students. It also involves a much more integrated approach between our health and education departments, which could further facilitate developing relationships between healthcare professionals and our educators. We also have to recognise how our youth communicate and interact. Building a sustainable, safe and engaging educational online platform that can complement and support our current education system, although a challenge must be explored. Our country is the technological capital of Europe, so access to expertise surely is not an obstacle here. Increased funding and support to those charities and awareness organisations that have long been the backbone of emotional support for the families and individuals affected by mental health illness and suicide. They are well respected and have a willing and engaged audience that trust and rely on their services. Long before people like me were having conversations like this in front of an Oireachtas committee, those organisations have been supporting communities and families throughout Ireland. They have a unique connection with many people, but often struggle for resources, especially over recent years. Remember that recession we just faced was far more than an economic one. It was a human recession, where many families and individuals went through some incredibly dark days, and in many cases it was these organisations that held them up when everything else was trying to knock them down. We also have to address our mental health system when it comes to secondary issues and more serious mental health situations. Over the past few months, I have received a massive amount of communication from families of loved ones attempting to access our mental health services, and I would not be doing them justice if I said it made for pretty reading. This, I understand, is highly complicated and sensitive, but it's a conversation that we have to have. Only this month did I receive a deeply upsetting news that a young man, Coillte, who was a family member of a friend of mine, was found dead in the River Liffey. He took his own life after enduring years of unexplainable pain. Many times his family tried to access help, but they were refused because the young man was consuming alcohol and told he could not be helped because of his drinking, which was intrinsically linked to his mental health illness. In a country that celebrates and promotes alcohol through its culture, it simply is not acceptable that someone is turned away from help on account of it. The family were even advised to take a barring order out, which no doubt would have been broken, resulting in criminalising this young man for being mentally unwell. Hardly something any mother wants to do to their own vulnerable child. His situation was complicated and seemed highly subjective to this family involved, but upon posting a story on my website, it became immediately evident that this story was not uncommon throughout Ireland. Mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, all explaining similar painful and heart-wrenching stories. The details of this story are slowly going to emerge over the coming months, but this family don't want to play the blame game or point fingers. They simply want a change. They do not want to see other families have to endure what they have had to, and will no doubt have to endure for the rest of their lives. No mother should ever feel this helpless, and they deserve so much more. Coillte, an intelligent, witty young man, deserved so much more. He was anyone's brother. We need to ask hard questions here. Those stories are just too common. So many people wanted to help this young man, but their hands were tied by bureaucracy, vague legalities, and a lack of resource that should never be put, and they should never have been put in that position in the first place. This is not a quick fix, but in order to progress, we must first accept that change is needed. Irish people in some cases have shown to be revolutionary when it comes to social innovation, and I hope we continue to be in the future. We have proven that negative cultural attitudes can be transformed, and although we are sometimes cautious of change, we never let it dictate our collective actions. We are built upon unique character and personality, and we punch well above our weight internationally. We can become world leaders when it comes to our mental health strategies going forward. Let's work on this together. This is only the start of a conversation, and it is important that the next Health Committee prioritise mental health for young people as a key issue for its future work programme. And I appeal to you all to use your full influence, passion and desire to work together with us to tackle and overcome the issues we are facing and help build a more resilient society and a new Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President, for a very informative and very courageous presentation. And indeed, you are right, we are in a transitional period.